Please stand for the pledge.
Good evening, everybody. First on the agenda tonight is a public hearing for Jones and Hogg, 6672 Lockwood Lane. Mike?
All my comments have been addressed. They got their variance, and the notes are on the plat.
Rich?
All comments have been addressed, Mr. Chairman.
Pat?
And all site plan issues have been addressed for this apportionment, Mr. Chairman, or lot line adjustment.
Is there anyone from the public that wishes to be heard on this?
Mr. Chairman, being there's no comment from the public, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There's also a motion on the table for a lot line adjustment, Anthony.
You have a resolution before you.
I'll offer the resolution.
I got it here otherwise, Anthony.
Okay, I have it.
You got it? Yeah.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer the resolution, the final subdivision approval resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 21-04, April 28, 2021, tax map number 53.1-79.1 and 79-2, Jones and Hogg subdivision, lot line adjustment.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Joel. Next on the agenda, P&R Real Estate Corp., 122 Glenida Avenue, Carmel, residential site plan. Mike?
The applicant proposes to legalize a four-family dwelling that is listed in my records as a two-family dwelling. The numbers on the zoning table are still incorrect. The coverage allowed is 30%, not 50%, but the lot does comply. It's just the 50 is still in there. For the record, 5 of the parking spaces back right out onto Route 52. It's something that, it's a pretty busy road that they back right out onto or pull right out onto, so. The minimum building area is not provided. Minimum 5,000 square feet is required by the commercial zoning district. That should be on the zoning table. Use variance is required from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and a few area variances, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 area variances are required from the Zoning Board. They're all for existing conditions, but they are required.
Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application involving legalizing an existing multifamily property that supports 4 apartments. The applicant must provide a water sewer use report for review. They have provided a water billing, but they need to actually provide a water and wastewater report following the 2014 New York State DEC design standards. Referral to Putnam County GML 239M is required. There's some work being done on the property. We don't know how much the area disturbance is, so we need to know if these stormwater discharges for construction under the general permit are required. All curbs, manholes, guide rails should be installed per section 120 of the town. Lighting plan should be provided. Drainage from the site should be addressed. The parking area pavement should be 8 inches, not 6 inches. Going to Mike's about a busy roadway, we need to have available site distance and calculations should be specified on the plan. Any clearings in the right-of-way may be should be identified. Calculations should be provided. Graphic representation of vehicle movements and turning radii for the site should be provided.
And Pat, you had some comments also. Thanks, Rich.
I did, Mr. Chairman. So Mike touched on the primary issues with this application. So first and foremost, it's a use variance is required. So that's a significant obstacle for the applicant. Mike mentioned the backing out onto Route 52. This is an issue that we've dealt with on a number of occasions, and we wrestle with this one. So while it's an existing parking area, the proposal, this site has a second driveway, which is a shared driveway to a rear property, where they're proposing some additional parking spaces. The property is kind of L-shaped, and there's additional land in that area. So theoretically, there's enough space to relocate those parking spaces in front of the building and recreate them in the back of the property where we don't have that issue backing out onto Route 52. And again, that's an issue we've dealt with for years. Most of these are pre-existing conditions, but when we have an opportunity to correct that condition, we should try. Second issue with respect to that is by relocating those parking spaces, if it's possible, we're now creating frontage that can be improved. The streetscape can be enhanced. And from this property south, it's primarily residential, primarily large front yards that are attractive. And as you move beyond this property, you have a couple of commercial properties. And then the Nejane property, if you remember that, we spent an awful lot of time wrestling with that, the aesthetics of that, making sure the frontage on 52 was attractive. So again, it appears as though there's an opportunity to deal with that frontage in this particular application. That shared driveway, I think we need an easement to get to that back property, so we would need an easement to share that. Let's see, street parking. And those are the primary issues, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pat. Would you like to address any of the comments from that Pat, Mike, and Rich just had?
So Robert Sherwood, representing the client, real estate clerk. We did want to get it back in front of you to get your reviews and your comment letters, which I'm hearing for the first time now.
You need to get closer to the microphone.
I'd like to reiterate that this is,
Sorry, is that better for you? So I'd like to reiterate, this is an existing building. When they purchased the building, probably 20-something years ago, it was a three-family. They did reconfigure it and add one apartment to it. As Pat said, the existing conditions were parking out front with the double driveway. If we utilize that back lot area for parking, there is a wetland back there, which is going to open up more hurdles for the client to try to legalize all of this. And whether or not that's actually would be approved, I don't know. So,
I think the good outweighs the bad in that case, though. I understand there's a wetland, but if you could get a safety concern where people aren't backing out onto 52, I think that makes a lot of sense to go for the wetland permit. I understand it's an extra month or whatever it is, but it's a pretty good reason to not back out onto Route 52 if possible.
I don't disagree with you on that. I'm just saying it's, another layer of the complexity for the applicant.
And if we understood a little bit more about that wetland, it could be a very low-quality wetland, in which case the trade-off is easy to make. If
Okay.
it's a significant wetland, however, we need to know that. So that information would be helpful.
Okay.
Comments from the board?
I have one. In terms of the frontage onto Glenida, I was there today, and, I agree and understand the comments about the, what I'll call the exterior land facing onto Glenida. That's one issue. I have a second issue about what I'll call beautification, which is the front of the building. Do you have any plans to add some improvements to the facing of the building to make it a little bit more attractive to the street, something even that doesn't cost too much?
Well, as a landscape architect, I'd love to say that we could do some streetscape and planting, but with the existing conditions of the driveway being that close, I don't think we can do anything really with the landscaping. I guess then that lends itself to modifying the building. I don't know if that's what you're getting
Not
at.
modifying the building as much as, shutters on the windows, dressing things up that are not high cost.
Yeah,
It frankly looks pretty drab and unattractive from the street at this
Sure.
point.
And those are things that I can definitely bring up to the client and the applicant, and sure. I don't see an issue with doing something like that.
I understand the applicant wanted to do this, and I think it's an opportunity for the town in a sense is, You have nice sidewalks in that whole area. You can walk to stores, you can walk to shops, you can walk to supermarkets. I think it could be good for the town, but I'd like to see, you know, as we're going through this entire revitalization of Town Carmel and master plans, I'd like to see you come in with something like wows us. You know, you're gonna do this to the landscape and out front. The line of sight is something I think we're all very cautious of. You know, line of sight is dangerous, people's safety, in fact.
Sure.
So I almost want you to come in here and knock our socks off and say, hey, this is what we want to do here. Look at the way it looks today, and this is what we could do tomorrow. Because
Right.
Pat's right, when you're driving in that direction, it really gets nice, but then it starts changing. And anything we touch here, especially when it's non-conforming, you got to give a little.
Sure, understood, understood. To get the process straight, though, we do need a use variance. Is it before we go and spend the money on delineating the wetlands and doing all these other items? And I don't know your guys' process, is it prudent to try to get the use variance first before coming back to the planning board? Or do I need your guys' favorable recommendation for the use variance?
Generally, what they do is they wait till you're at a point where you're almost approvable,
Okay,
and then you go for the use variance. So it
Okay.
has to be, what do you say, about 95% complete is a good number for that? Where
Yeah.
you're not going to start changing things, and then the board's going to say, whoa, we didn't know that was happening.
Sure.
Meaning the
Okay.
zoning board. So it has to be close to approvable.
And the planning board has the opportunity to send a message with the referral to the zoning board. And if they love your project, that's an important message for the zoning board to hear.
sure,
Especially
understood.
with this issue, which we're dealing with the next application as well. It's an ongoing issue with the town right now, so we need to come to grips with that generally. So if the zoning board can hear some opinions from the planning board, which is these use variances might not be so bad, provided you're knocking their socks off, as Craig said.
Gotcha.
I think that will help.
That's a technical term we use, right?
That's a technical term.
You know,
All right,
this board really has never sent anything to the zoning board purposely that we didn't feel was warranted to go there.
No,
We don't
that
want to
just-
do that. We don't want to start that.
That was more of my question, to try to get an understanding of how the process goes.
I mean,
Okay.
this board and the consultants have been talking about commercial residential upstairs. The town's been talking about, we've been talking about a lot of these things. So we're not against it. We just need to do it right.
Fair enough.
Any thoughts from anyone else?
No, I did, we'll get you all of the consultants' comments, because you haven't seen them yet.
Yep.
And I think take heed in what they all said with regards to the frontage, the parking.
Sure.
And all, because we're pretty much laying out the path for you,
Yep,
okay?
understood. Perfect, thank you all.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is DPL Realty LLC, 102 Glen Ida Avenue, residential site plan. Mike, I believe you had some comments?
Yep. The applicant proposes to add 4 residential dwelling units on the second and third floors over the existing commercial use or uses. I'm told that it's just one law firm down there now, so this will be mixed use. Only existing mixed uses are permitted in the C commercial zoning district. The use variance is required from the ZBA. Area variance is required for lot width, the size of the parking spaces, and what is on the adjacent lot to the north, right by the patio. You're putting 2 patios out there. If it's adjacent to somebody's house, you may want to consider shifting it somewhere, because there's no setback requirement, but you still don't want to have a patio where people are going to be outside smoking or drinking, doing something, and people live right next door. So it's something to think about,
Yeah, I don't think that's the case, but we'll make sure. And
That's
we'll-
fine. You
we'll
just
be sure
didn't
of
show the next lot over. I couldn't see it, so. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Rich, comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mike mentioned, 4 residential units on the top of a second and third floor in an existing building. It will require a variance. Referral to Putnam County Planning, GML 239 is required. Area disturbance for the work being performed should be provided so as to determine threshold criteria for stormwater regulations. Applicant must provide a water and wastewater reports, water sewer report for review. Sidewalks, manhole, guide rails should be installed per section 128 of the Town of Carmel Town Code. All plantings should be verified by the Town of Carmel Wetlands Inspector and should be installed per section 142 of the code. Lighting plan should be provided, and available site distances and calculations should be specified on the plan, along with graphic representation of vehicle movements and turning radii within the property. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Pat, I believe you had some comments
I
also.
did, Mr. Chairman. So this, again, very similar to the last application, requires the use variance to add the residential units above. This site, however, compared to the other property, is set up better. So there isn't the backing up onto the main road and so forth. So it's a better configuration. But a couple of things, Mike indicated that they would need variances for the size of the parking spaces. They're proposing to resurface the parking lot, so that might be an opportunity to bring the spaces up to conformance rather than seeking the variance. So that's something you might want to look at. Mike mentioned those outdoor terrace areas. We're not applying the residential code, so there's no requirement to provide residential open space. However, I think the planning board should look at that carefully. Now that this would be a residential building, are those two terraces adequate for the folks that would live in that building? Would we want to see more usable open space? There's area in the back. Are the terraces enough? So that's another question with respect to that. It will be a mixed-use building, so of that parking, how will it be distinguished? Will there be tenant parking spaces reserved? How will you deal with that? That's something we should think about. There's one minor comment. The refuse disposal dumpster is shown at the very back of that parking lot. If I'm a tenant upstairs, I don't want to drag my hefty bag of garbage 150 feet to that dumpster way in the back of the property. So there may be a more conveniently located site for that dumpster. Exterior lighting, are you doing anything now that it's a residential site? Do you need to make it more secure with exterior lighting? Show that on the plan if necessary. Any changes to utility services now that you have residences in the building, if you could clarify that. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pat. Any comments from,
Yeah, just as was mentioned, the applicants are looking to turn what is currently office and storage space that they've been unable to rent for the past several years to residential, to the 4 units that we're discussing, comprising a total of 6 bedrooms, with the sense that this is going to be met by the market in a much more rentable way. So we're showing the outdoor amenity space as we talked about. We are doing some reconfiguration to meet the requirements for parking, for the mixed uses. And, you know, the applicants are quite confident that residential units in this part of the hamlet would be desirable to the public, and they're seeking to make the units and associated amenities attractive to the town and public, as well as to prospective tenants. So we're looking, the primary issue obviously here is the use variance that's going to be required. And so we would, you know, we would hope that, you know, we're happy to have this dialogue, and it seems like there's little things that we want to verify, little things that we want to adjust and tweak and look at maybe a little bit closer. I think generally we're pretty close. You know, obviously we're talking about pretty subtle changes to the building. There's no change in the building footprint. And we're looking to bring the rest of the site up to meet with the proposed use that we're talking about. So we would hope that, again, as the primary issue with this application being the need for the use variance, that we can get that referral tonight, so that we can go forward, see if this is something that is going to be a possibility before we carry on from there, especially given the somewhat minor nature of some of the things that we're talking about. You know, do we push this over here? Do we pull that over here? Can we adjust the parking or the refuse enclosures in any way? And just verification of just some of the utility information. It doesn't seem like there's a tremendous amount of work yet to be done, and so we're hoping that that we could see a referral to the ZBA to see if there is a next step beyond that.
questions from the board? Do we feel that any change in utilities would be needed for this change of use?
We're anticipating there will be a minor uptick in water and sewer usage, as we spoke with town consultants about previously. This was obviously previously a pretty vibrant building with a lot of use, which has become considerably less over the last years. So to go from a significant decrease in use of water and sewer to just bringing it up slightly, I think is minor. So as far as the utilities go, I think it's very minor changes.
Mike, when do we get to do an inspection of these properties from a fire, building code type thing? Where does that come into play here? Because a use variance, you would think you need to get involved.
Well, there's a fire inspection that happens every 3 years on all of these type of buildings. If it's a restaurant, bar, multifamily, then it's every year. Is that what you mean?
Well, on this, if you're gonna make upstairs residential, before we do that, shouldn't it be inspected?
He's going to need to meet the code or else he can't do it.
Correct.
So,
Right, there'll obviously be building permits, and there's
Sprinklers.
more to the process than
That was-
what we're
yeah,
discussing.
you'll be putting
here.
sprinklers because you have the 3rd story, so obviously that's going to be a requirement. but-
Sprinklers means, proper means of egress as a residential,
Correct.
dwelling up there now.
And of course, all that would be vetted during building permit process, and
Correct.
obviously, we'd work closely between the building designer and with Mike.
So, Mr. Chairman, just, you're hearing a very aggressive advocation on behalf of this application to go to the zoning board. If, in fact, significant renovations are necessary to bring the building up to building code requirements that cost a lot of money, we now have an applicant that's going to say, well, I can't really do some of the stuff we talked about. So just bear in mind, if you make the referral without some of these relatively minor comments being answered, they still can come back to haunt us. So just, I'm not suggesting not to make the referral, but I'm just, be cautious that you know what you're referring.
There's still 2 pages of comments, and some of them might be easy to resolve, from lighting to landscaping. I think Pat brought up a good point. If you're gonna, why don't we try to eliminate some of these variances that you'll be needing? The parking's an easy one, I would think, right? So if you're gonna do the parking lot over, restripe it to be 10 by 20 spaces, if you have enough room, obviously. I'd like to try to get these 2 pages of comments down to, a page. Nothing magical about that, but I don't know what the board is in agreement with that. I think there's some low-lying fruit here we could take off. Plantings, the lighting, site distances, make sure you go out there and look at the site distances, make sure they comply. Exterior lighting, the dumpster that Pat mentioned earlier. And again, similar to the previous applicant, right? Come in with something that we're gonna look at and say, wow, this is really good. This is gonna be good for downtown. Any other comments?
No, I agree.
Kim, Bob, Vicki?
No, sounds good.
Okay, hopefully we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have minutes from February 24th, March 11th, and April 8th. Has anyone gotten a chance to review them, and do we have a motion to accept them?
I did review them. I sent some very minor comments to Rose, and she's taking them to just clean up items, nothing of substance. So I would propose, I make a motion that they be approved.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
On the money.